Violence has erupted across Mexico following the killing of the country's most wanted drug leader, known as El Mencho.
So when the Flores brothers were down in Mexico around 2007, they were directing traffic, as it were. They were orchestrating shipments from Mexico up to Chicago, and they were having their underlings in Chicago distribute the cocaine and heroin to a network of large wholesalers, you know, people from New York, guys from Detroit, guys from south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, Indiana, some Hispanic dealers, but a lot of black drug dealers were the Flores brothers' customers. And that's why they were so important, because there was a culture and language barrier between many of the cartel operatives in the country and black customers. BMF at this point was out of the picture, so the Flores brothers had become a very important link between the cartels and the large African American customers in the Midwest and the East Coast. So the Flores brothers were to be protected at all costs. So one night, the Flores brothers are in Puerto Vallarta, and they're there to meet some Chinese pseudoephedrine suppliers. Now, pseudoephedrine is the ingredient in Sudafed. Now, some of you may have gone to CVS or Rite Aid and complained of a stuffed up nose, and they tell you to get some pseudoephedrine, and you have to sign your name in a book even to buy one box of it, because if you buy too much, the DEA is going to call you. It's not prescription, but they keep track of how much is being bought, because pseudoephedrine is the primary ingredient for crystal methamphetamine, which is made in Mexico. And in fact, for the cartels, it's a much higher profit item than cocaine, because they make it themselves. They don't have to buy it from anybody. They just get the precursor chemical. So the Flores twins had a deal cooking where they didn't even have to make crystal methamphetamine. They were going to buy 4 tons of pseudoephedrine from some Chinese suppliers for like $25 million. And they were going to get it over the border into California. And El Chapo had, I guess, introduced them to some chemist in California who was going to give them $80 million once it got to California. So that's a $56 million profit just for moving some pseudoephedrine across the border. It wasn't even turned into crystal methamphetamine on their side. And that's a kind of amounts of money you can make when you're playing at that level. But things didn't go as expected. The Chinese guys wanted to go to a strip club, so the Flores twins and their wives take the Chinese guys to a strip club. They're in there. Suddenly, the doors burst open. 5 men armed with AK-47s storm the place. The strippers run out, and the Chinese and the Flores twins and their wives are grabbed, and they're taken outside and thrown into 5 black suburban vans. And they begin to pull off, and of course, everyone's frantic. And one of the Flores brothers says, hey, I can give you, he assumes they're kidnappers, which they are in a way. He says, I can give you $10 million, or, just give me some time. And the head kidnapper says, nope, you could have paid me when you had your chance. Now you're going to prison for life. And the Flores brother realizes that these people that have kidnapped him are actually the Mexican federal police, and they're planning to turn him over to the feds, because this specific Mexican policeman who had approached Pedro Flores at his wedding and tried to extort him, and the Flores brothers didn't pay, this was the Mexican federal agent who had stormed in a strip club with his men and grabbed them that night. So they're taken to a headquarters, but one of the Flores brothers' wives had managed to call somebody, or hit the phone, and somebody knew what was wrong. So as they're sitting there in the headquarters or wherever they took them, phone rings, and the head kidnapper gets on the phone, and suddenly he calls whoever's on the phone El Jefe. Well, it was Arturo Beltran Leyva on the phone. Now, Arturo Beltran Leyva is dead now. He was killed by the Mexican Marines in a huge gun battle, but at the time this was occurring, he didn't really work for El Chapo and El Mayo and the Sinaloa cartel. Him and his brothers were a group affiliated with them. They were very powerful in their own right, and eventually El Chapo set him up, Arturo Beltran Leyva. He's the one who gave the information to the Mexican government that allowed them to find where he was and kill him so that Sinaloa cartel could take over the Beltran Leyva brothers' business. So El Jefe's on the phone with the chief kidnapper, Arturo Leyva, and he's at that time allied with El Mayo and El Chapo, and they offer $5 million on the spot to let the Flores twins go because, like I said, these guys are so important to what's going on for the cartel, cocaine and heroin-wise, in the United States. And the guy doesn't want it. Possibly the U.S. government was going to give a bigger reward, who knows. And they load up the Flores brothers, they let their wives go, and they I think, fly back to L.A. or something. And at this point, situation's getting desperate for El Chapo, so they call El Mencho. Now, El Mencho was somebody running a branch of the Sinaloa cartel at this time, and he was infamous for being really violent. I think he had been a Mexican policeman himself, and then he got into the security ranks of the cartel and was rising up. So when the Mexican federal police refused to take the bribe, El Mencho was called. And El Mencho moves into Puerto Vallarta with hundreds of armed men immediately. And these Mexican federal police are informed that all roadways into the Puerto Vallarta airport, where they're going to have to take the Flores brothers, are blocked, and there's going to be a war. And El Mencho has a lot more guys and a lot more firepower than this small group of Mexican federal police who, remember, they're doing this operation kind of on their own, right? This isn't sanctioned by the Mexican government. They can't really call unlimited reinforcements, so they simply are forced to let the Flores twins go. And of course, the Flores twins eventually paid back this loyalty. Well, I guess it's not really loyalty. They were just a paycheck to El Chapo, and they paid El Chapo back by sitting on the stand and testifying against him. But of course, El Chapo had already gotten rid of Beltran Leyva. So at the highest levels, I mean, people have absolutely no loyalty. You're merely a dollar amount. And, you know, when it's your time to be killed, it's your time to be killed. And I guess from their perspective, the Flores brothers probably saw how that these guys were operating with each other, killing each other over who got to supply them with cocaine, because that's really ultimately why El Chapo got rid of Beltran Leyva, so he didn't have to split the profits the Flores brothers were sending back, among other things. And so they went to the DEA. As for El Mencho, he currently is now considered the most powerful narco in Mexico. He started his own cartel, the Jalisco New Generation cartel, and they're possibly the most violent cartel ever. We all know that some years ago, Mexico was experiencing a really high murder rate in Tijuana and Juarez, and it had calmed down somewhat, but 2018 saw record homicide levels for many cities, even higher than it had been 7, 8, 9 years ago at the peak of the drug war. And a lot of that is due to El Mencho and his Jalisco New Generation cartel moving in. And if you don't get down, you lay down. The El Chapo trial.